Imagine carrying the title of being the most dangerous human being on the face of the earth. With that, however, comes UFC notoriety and a lot of money. But the Predator, Francis Ngannou, despite all of his success, feels like he hasn't made it yet. Today, we'll be looking at his comments and the best KOs from the heavyweight champ. Starting with Ngannou, he thinks he hasn't made it. Francis has made quite a lot of money in his professional career by being the UFC heavyweight champ and one of the scariest men to ever live. And now that he's reeling in the big bucks along with pay-per-view points, it's easy to assume that his net worth is in the millions. But even with all that money, he still doesn't feel like he's made it yet. This has a lot to do with his childhood. We'd say he grew up poor, but when you hear his story, you'll be able to grasp just how underprivileged some people are in the world. The Predator talked about how he still holds a pen every time he sees one because when he was a kid, it was a luxury. He was the kid who couldn't buy a pen and would often be kicked out of class for not bringing one. Ngannou was often alone because people would look down on him. Therefore, for him, something we might find insignificant is still precious, even though he's far from being poor anymore. The feeling of being alone in the world and people thinking he's worth nothing is what motivated him to be where he is today, and it continues to motivate him to this day. Next, a look into Francis's childhood. Ngannou had to face a lot of challenges at a very young age. He spoke on Joe Rogan's podcast about working in the sand all day and then going to school without breakfast. He couldn't afford a proper uniform or books. At that point, he hated his life and wanted to get out of the situation. Francis claimed he likes to hear stories about people's favorite cartoons growing up because he feels like he never really had a childhood. When he looks back today, there are moments when he can't believe he's made it this far. The man's literally living his childhood dream and helping people from his country along the way. Ngannou likes to visit his home country, Cameroon, as often as he can. He collects clothes and shoes and ships them to people in his country. He also has boxes of pens in his house because they'll always be valuable to him. Ngannou claimed that even 50 years from now, he'll have to hold a pen every time he sees it. Moving on, let's look at Francis's top 5 knockouts. Starting with number 5, Cain Velasquez. Beating the greatest heavyweight of all time has to be in your top 5 knockouts. Velasquez was an absolute machine back in his day, and even though he wasn't in peak physical form in 2019, he was looking to get a rebound and get back into the title race. It was going to be the speed, volume, and wrestling by Cain against the deadly power of Francis. At this point, Ngannou had already lost to Stipe for the title, and the fight was pretty entertaining for as long as it lasted. The only problem, however, was that it lasted only 30 seconds. Cain put the pressure on, but he was no match for Francis in the cage. The stoppage was weird as it kind of looked like Cain went down because his knee buckled. Many people thought that the finish should be considered a doctor's stoppage, but it was ruled out to be a TKO stoppage via punches. Now, let's be honest, the win would have been a lot sweeter if Cain wasn't coming off so many injuries and was still the world's best that he used to be, but it's still a nice feather in Francis's cap, and it'd be disrespectful to the two-time champ if we didn't have him on here. Next, number 4, the rematch against Curtis Blaydes. On paper, it looked like Blaydes is a nightmare matchup for Ngannou. He's big, strong, and fast with his hands. Plus, his wrestling is some of the best in the game. The two first faced off in 2016, but the fight was called off after the first round because of a doctor's stoppage. Francis got the win, but it wasn't very definitive, and the timeline for their rematch worked out perfectly, since we were at a bit of a crossroads over Francis's career. Ngannou was coming off 2 back-to-back losses against Miocic and Lewis. In the last outing against Lewis, he looked extremely gun-shy. He had a lot to prove though this match, which made the result even more impactful. The main event bout lasted 45 seconds, as Francis clipped Curtis with a big overhand right. Blaydes tried to recover multiple times and tried to get back on his feet, but Ngannou was on him like a pit bull with a chew toy. After multiple knockdowns, the fight was stopped, and Francis left China with a nice performance of the night bonus. And this was a must-win fight, and he did exactly what he needed to do. And this win started an unbeaten streak that hasn't ended yet. Moving on, number 3, the KO against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Even though this wasn't the most technical of finishes, it was one of the scariest sights many of us have ever seen, and that's why we had to have it on this list. As soon as the pandemic struck, UFC was the first promotion to put on fights. UFC 249 will be remembered for many reasons, but we often forget what Francis Ngannou accomplished that night. With the heavyweight division waiting for the Miocic-Cormier rivalry to be over, Francis was taking out everyone in the first round and solidifying himself as the #1 contender. His next challenge was an undefeated fighter in Jairzinho, and who also had a great striker. How did Francis deal with that guy? Well, he rushed at him with a barrage of looping punches and knocked him out in 20 seconds. No technique, no defense, just punches and bunches. And just like that, it was over. This win highlighted his power even more. All he needs to do is touch you once and you're going to sleep. This was Ngannou's 4th consecutive win, and it left no doubt in anyone's mind that he deserves to fight for the title. What even more impressive is that in all 4 of those fights, he fought for less than 3 minutes combined, which is crazy. Up next, number 2, is the viral KO against Alistair Overeem. Many of you probably think that was the best KO of Francis' career. And why wouldn't you? Everything about this finish was a work of art. Overeem is a well-established name in the heavyweight division, and this was supposed to be Ngannou's toughest test. And the two fought again in September of 2017, and the win got Francis the first title shot against Stipe. At this point, Francis was considered almost untouchable, undefeated inside the octagon and tearing through the competition. All eyes were on him, and the expectations were running high, yet somehow he still found a way to shock everyone. The fight didn't go past the 2-minute mark. Francis landed an uppercut from hell, and Alistair was out on his feet. Ngannou followed it up with a big bomb as Ngannou lay on the ground stiff as a board. It's without a doubt one of the most violent finishes in UFC history. Jon Anik made the moment even better by screaming, "Down goes Reem," as soon as Ngannou landed the uppercut. And as we mentioned earlier, everything about his KO was incredible, and that's why it's one of the most watched clips of the UFC. Finally, number 1, the coronation against Stipe. After losing to Stipe in dominant fashion back in 2018, it took Francis more than 3 years to stand across the cage with the greatest heavyweight of all time. Stipe had just gotten one over Cormier in the trilogy. He'd already had a win over Francis, so many people doubted the challenger going into the bout. We didn't know if there was any improvements in Francis's game. In their last fight, he lacked the skills to win. How much had he improved since then? We didn't know, because all his fights ended in less than a minute. All these doubts were shut down when Francis showed us a whole new side of him. Ngannou didn't rush, and he decided to kickbox technically against Stipe. And guess what? He was winning. It created a new mythical fighter that fans now call Patient Ngannou. The takedown defense was on point too. The fight ultimately ended in the second round after a big first round for the challenger. Stipe hit Francis with his signature pullback right hand that got him the belt. He rushed Ngannou and was put to sleep in a scary fashion. There is a new king in the heavyweight division, and he still rules it to this day. And that's a wrap for this video. Which of these KOs is your personal favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. I'll see you in the next one.